we're here in Boston to celebrate the launch of the Dimensions Knowledge Graph. To tell us a bit more about how Dimensions is joining forces with metaphacts knowledge graph technology to democratize research data, we're joined by Sebastian Schmidt, the CEO of metaphacts. Sebastian, thanks so much for joining us today. We're here in Boston. You are in the middle of bio-IT world. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, and I cannot wait to hear the answers. But first of all, you're going to kick us off with a little bit about you. Can you tell us about you, your background, and what you're doing here in Boston this week?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me here. So I have an IT background. So actually started in software development, and in I think 2008 I joined a small startup, and they were doing something called knowledge graphs, which at the time I had never heard of. So it was interesting to learn about it, but it was a time where not too many people knew what a knowledge graph is. So when we went out and we talked to someone about the great things you can do with knowledge graphs, they were like, "What's that? Can you explain it in more detail?" And you basically started completely from the basics. And so at some point, the startup didn't really got much traction in that market. But I got to know a lot of the experts in the space, and went off for different paths. And in 2019, one of the other early joiners in that startup, he called me up, Peter, and he was like, "Hey, we have to talk. This whole topic is like really kicking off, and it's like a really big thing now, and with AI and so on. So looking for people. We have this company now, and we're growing it." So I talked to him and learned about all the cool things they're doing with it. So in 2019, I joined the company, and currently I'm the CEO of metaphacts. And last year we joined Digital Science, and this week in Boston to present a product we jointly launched, the Dimensions Knowledge Graph.
That's so exciting. So Dimensions is this massive linked research database, and now we're leveraging the power of knowledge graphs to kind of do amazing things with that data. So I'm going to be that person that's going to ask you the question you were asking back then and everyone else was asking. What is a knowledge graph?
Yes, so there are several layers of what a knowledge graph actually is. At the most basic infrastructure layer, it's a different representation of data. So instead of pressing your data into different your tables, to different schemes, which you can very much imagine like an Excel spreadsheet, you're instead trying to capture every data point as a node and the connections to it, which makes this a super flexible format, because instead of just having to press everything into that same spreadsheet all the time, you can, if you have new data, if you have different data, you can just expand your graph and you can grow it and you can add nodes to it and new relations and build, independent of what you started out with, an integrated system of knowledge. But it's much more than that, because the knowledge graphs we are using is a specific type. It's a semantic knowledge graph. So it has another important characteristic, and that is a semantic model that describes what's in that graph. So usually if you would be working with data, you would have to understand how that data is represented in the different systems, which, if you're an IT person, that is fairly straightforward. If you're not in IT, that becomes quite challenging. And most of the questions in a business are not asked by the IT, but they are asked somewhere in one of the business departments. And so what you get with a knowledge graph is a description of what's in that data, what's in that graph, in the language of the business. So a business user can go to the graph and can say, well, I actually want to understand how our project data correlates to products we are selling, correlates to the market, correlates to the users we have in a certain segment, correlates to suppliers that provide data to us as part of our offering. And through that complete system, I can just query in my own language, which means it makes this very open and accessible to everyone, which is why we're also talking about democratization of data. It's the way of how I can actually understand data if I'm not in IT.
Gosh, that's brilliant, because that's exactly what we want. There is so much information out there these days. And so to be able to slice and dice that, but also really make sense of it and have that really friendly almost user interface, will make such a difference. The knowledge graphs, as you said, are not as new a concept as we think they are. Can you give us an example of where we use knowledge graphs in everyday life and the impact that that has had?
Yes. Yeah, so one of the most known knowledge graphs is probably the one that's behind Google. So when you search on Google, you get those knowledge panels and you get very structured, specific information around potential matches to your keyword. And that is using a knowledge graph, where it takes your keyword and it tries to disambiguate it and tries to give you back an actual resource that is matching it. And because it then finds that specific resource in the graph, so that specific node, that point, it can then explore the neighborhood and give you structured information around it. This technology that has been very much used in social networks also. So because it's a graph, it leads itself to anything that is, very connected data and information. But now, by now, we really find knowledge graphs throughout the enterprises everywhere. So it's really interesting, no matter in which industry, no matter which organization we talk to, they have heard of knowledge graphs, and most of the time they already have a specific knowledge graph implementation, often around topics like product lifecycle management or supply chain, where they have complex networks that they have to manage.
So this kind of lends itself to the platform you've created, which you call a meta-factory, because you really are taking this entire system and kind of making the process a lot smoother in all of these different aspects. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept of your meta-factory?
Yes. So metaphacts is a software product, and we went through a number of iterations in really understanding what the market needed most. So when we started out, we were like, well, knowledge graphs are becoming a thing, people understand them, but it is really tough still to draw value from them, because as you said, you need a UX, you need some way to interact with it. People are still, if it is nicely organized, still really bad at writing queries. So you need a way how they can search on it. They can just give a keyword also, or they can explore the graph to discover what's in it. And for that, you need a user interface. And that was something that was completely missing in that knowledge graph space at the time, which was 2014 when Peter founded the company. So that was our initial focus. And we did that for a few years, and then we realized, well, there's another major part that is missing, and that is allowing the relevant people in the business, those people who need to be able to understand the data, to participate in modeling it. Because then in the end, it was again the IT people modeling it, and they were like, well, those people most likely talk about a project and a part. And then they modeled it that way, and the business unit looked at it and was like, what's a part? Oh, you mean a component? Yeah, I know a component. And so you have to really match that language. You have to really understand how they think, which means you have to involve them. So we have those two parts, basically, of modeling knowledge and tying the data into it, and on the other side, creating an experience of interacting with it.
It's actually really interesting you say that. I'm a materials chemist, and so I would work with scientists and engineers, and they would use the same words but with very, very different meanings. Yes. And until you understand the context within which they mean it, you don't realize that they're speaking, to cross purposes. Yeah. And there's all of that confusion and misunderstanding that can breed from that. So speaking of confusion, misunderstanding, misinformation, knowledge graphs do play a really vital role, actually, in helping us increase sort of transparency, in explainability in research, and that trustworthiness, that component that we're desperate for in this age of, misinformation and disinformation, and just with the sheer volume of research that we have being produced every day.
Yes.
So how can a knowledge graph help us decipher what is credible, what can be built upon in a trustworthy manner?
Yeah, so if you look into the research space, most of what you have available is documents. And while this is more or less great for a human, you can get that document, you can read through it, you can hopefully you can follow what the person who wrote it put into it. It is really tough if you want to stay on top of what's happening in research. So what you want is extracting the core concepts and the core statements, the core findings of what is in there. And that means you have to somehow normalize it against something. You have to somehow contextualize that. And that's where the knowledge graph can help you again. So taking a knowledge graph in which you're already describing the domain, where you call out the core concepts, their relation, how people are, or what people are actually researching about, you can then use that to extract the knowledge from those documents, from all of the literature you have, and create an understanding of what exactly is currently happening in that space. And through that, learn much more about that whole ecosystem of research.
So you can really start to spot emerging trends. You can start to make connections, not just within a single siloed discipline, but really across disciplines as well. So what is the impact of that?
So the impact is especially when you look at very emerging trends that are happening there, where it is very likely that you wouldn't even find it if you don't have a technology like a knowledge graph. Because you're going to search for your same keyword over and over and over again. And you're going to get the same results all of the time. So by having that graph and having those connections to everything around it, and looking at those networks additionally, you will see how things are shifting and moving, how new things are developing. By tying this from the topics to the people, to the organizations, and then seeing that those same people and organizations are suddenly focusing on a completely new topic. Well, it's very unlikely they switch the domain in which they are researching. It's probably just something is changing in that domain. And by understanding the complete graph, you will be much more likely to pick up what's happening there and understanding that transition.
Mm-hmm. It is amazing, actually. I guess with a regular keyword search, your research is only as good as your prior research that you've already done, because that's the limit of your current knowledge. And so just by expanding these, keywords into concepts and things, you're able to bring so much more into it.
Yes.
So how does this play alongside AI? We're all talking about artificial intelligence. How can you combine the power of a knowledge graph with artificial intelligence and machine learning to really accelerate research and discovery?
Yeah. So when we think AI, that's one of those concepts. That's also, again, it's very overloaded and very broad what's behind that. And I would say a knowledge graph is a form of AI already. Mm-hmm. So a knowledge graph, we call it symbolic AI. It's an explicit representation of knowledge. And while you have machine learning and you have generative AI as well, it is a core part, because that gives you the trust layer, the foundation, where the subject matter experts have worked with that, they have captured that. And then you can utilize other AI methods running on top of that to derive insights from that, to analyze those networks. And you have a lot of graph analytics and other things which are often overlooked because they're not that current type of generative AI. But depending on your use case, any of those can help you advance that significantly. But it always depends on having a correct foundation, a good foundation. And that's something which generative AI in its own is not going to give you. I mean, you can continuously improve your prompt, you can continuously improve how you build that system, but it goes back to a similar case like with the keyword. If you don't know what you need to know, you're not going to find it. And having that graph as the underlying layer, the trust layer that you can also tie back into, that's solving a lot of the problems you will see with our AI methods.
You've mentioned generative AI. This is an area of opportunity, but also an area of risk in research. It can be used to suggest new methods of synthesis. It can be used to predict new proteins and molecules and things. But then it can also be guilty of creating things like hallucinations in what it's producing that may look correct, but are not quite correct. With knowledge graphs, how can we help better understand the provenance of the information that we're building upon to ensure that trust and credibility?
Yeah. So I think it's, as I said, I come from an IT background. So for me, it's like technology is always, I see much more of the opportunity than the risk.
I like that.
But looking at large language model, obviously there is a risk in, like with any other technology, using it wrong. And hallucinations are something that you have to be aware of. But it's not much different if you apply any kind of machine learning and you use the wrong statistical method or anything, you're going to get some weird result out of it. And it might look plausible at first, but when you dive in deeper, if a subject matter expert does check it in more detail, you will realize, well, it's not. So the question really is, how can I minimize subject matter expert time in validating that, in understanding that I'm doing the right thing, that my result is correct, because that's always the limiting factor. And the knowledge graph allows me to do a lot of that upfront and to also build on public knowledge. So especially the pharma life sciences space has a lot of ontologies or semantic models already published. A lot of their knowledge is published in the knowledge graph already, which means you can load that as a foundation, as a basis. And whenever you get results, you can check them against that. And that means you find out one of two things. Either you will see that, well, it actually is completely out of context and the result just doesn't make any sense. It's very likely a hallucination. Or it's somehow in the right concept, but it's not matching up with the knowledge I know. So I might have something novel, something new that I'm actually interested in. And that's where the knowledge graph can help you a lot in focusing that, in cleaning the data first, utilizing such shared knowledge, and then not having to do a lot of validation afterwards anymore.
Gosh, it's such a time saver. But I really like the fact that you've mentioned that we're not doing away with subject matter experts. They're still so important.
Yes.
But this is just an opportunity to accelerate some of that, that research and development time, and really slice and dice that data in a way that you are giving them at least the kind of most relevant short list of information that they can then make decisions on. So you've talked about the democratization of data, and you are here today launching Dimensions Knowledge Graph. So can you tell us a little bit about how your superpowers are combining to democratize that data for researchers?
Yes. So what we did is we took the Dimensions data set, so publications, patents, clinical trials, across all of the global research knowledge that is there, and we utilized existing extractions, but also expanded on that to build a knowledge graph out of that. Now, that in itself is an interesting thing, but then we said, well, if you, for example, want to apply that in the pharma space, then you are interested in that public knowledge, in that structured knowledge that already exists in the form of graphs. And again, this is unfortunately very fragmented, very siloed, because people are always looking at a specific problem. They're looking specifically in proteomics, in transcriptomics, in metabolomics, and creating data sets and knowledge around that. But if you do broader research, for example, looking for the next drug target for specific disease, you probably want to go across all of that. So we took all of those data sources, or a large part of those, we integrated them with the knowledge we extracted from the scientific publications, and then we said, well, there is a third part missing to that. Because if you'll talk to any kind of organization that is very heavily active in research, they have their own proprietary data internal as well. And that is going to be super important as well. So the Dimensions Knowledge Graph brings all of those three together. So the technologies we have used on our side, we are applying at the customer side as well, and then create one graph that captures the scientific knowledge from publications, the structured knowledge for a specific domain, and the internal knowledge inside of the organization.
Wow. So it really is that holistic approach, all the information you can possibly have and all of those connections.
Yes.
So you mentioned pharma and the life sciences. They are big fans, meta fans, I think we're trying to coin, aren't we? But they're big fans of, the idea of the meta factory and how we can use knowledge graphs to leverage that. What is it about pharma and the life sciences in particular that lends itself so well to the adoption of knowledge graphs in accelerating that research?
So I think it is actually mostly that pharma has taken an investment in that direction already several years back. And we are seeing that in other domains happening as well now. And the reason for that was that all of the pharma organizations at some point realized that they will not be able to decipher the complete human genome in all detail on their own. That's too big of a task to really understand that and drive precision medicine and everything. So they had to come together in pre-competitive data sharing, working together to enable all of that. And they very early said, well, we need an open standard and we need something that is flexible and extensible, and we need a knowledge graph. So they started to publish all of that data in the form of knowledge graphs, which means if you want to do research in pharma, there's actually no way to get around knowledge graphs. You do need that. And that's where we had very early on a lot of traction, but also because it's a very research-heavy workflow. But we are seeing that discrete manufacturing, engineering, a lot of other industries are realizing that that's actually a very smart way. And things like autonomous driving cars also, they will also not be developed anymore by just this one company taking care of everything, but they also go into an increased amount of data sharing. And I think this is going to be a blueprint that we're going to see much broader across industries that are research heavy.
I think that's a really lovely example, actually, of collaboration in a place that maybe we don't often see it, or we make these assumptions that if it's a commercial entity, that actually they won't play nicely together, they won't be sharing any information. So it's really nice to see that sort of industry understanding that we need to come together in order for us all to move forward and to have that impact on society. I think it's really refreshing and a really nice story to tell. So speaking of stories, you will have seen loads of these examples in your time at Metafacts. Can you tell us maybe one or two stories of how the Metafactory has had an impact on really driving that transfer from information to societal impact through science?
So I think we had a number of interesting quick insights. I mean, it's probably not exactly what you were looking for, but a lot of projects where we came into a pretty mature organization that was very research heavy, and where part of the organization drove an initiative to apply a knowledge graph. And it was usually because they realized that somehow they don't have that full understanding of what's happening in the organization. So we applied the technology, we started to integrate the different data sources, and the first time we provided a dashboard to people, they were looking at it and they were like, this doesn't look like our organization. Are you sure this is what we are doing? And they looked at projects and they were like, there's a team doing this here. I thought this team is doing that. and actually, we planned to do that in the next months, and someone is already on it. This is really interesting. So they very quickly discovered that there's a lot of connected initiatives just inside of their own organization, which was previously not visible to them. That is a repeating pattern that we are seeing quite often, which allows them to then also streamline those activities. So bring people together that are actually already working on the same thing, help them understand what the current state of their research is, and then jointly push forward instead of just reiterating and redoing the same thing again over and over.
It's amazing. So it's not just that you're making the process more efficient, but you're actually maximizing resources as well by allowing people that overview of how money and time is being spent, and making sure that you're not duplicating efforts. Because I think that is a big challenge in research. I have a real bugbear about us not publishing negative results, across research. So we don't know how many people are doing things that are not working, but we're wasting all of that time and money and resource on those things. But actually, this is one way that we can start to bring all of that information together and really maximize the resources that we have.
And it is important to do things that might not work out and figure out that they don't work out. But the question is, do I have to do it a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth time? And do I have to do it exactly the same way? Or if then, can I change something in the approach to maybe see if then that changes the outcome?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. So we have talked a little bit about industry, but what I'd love to talk about is, how do you see knowledge graphs making a big difference when it comes to technology transfer? How is it really speeding that process up, from information from the lab bench into a commercially available product that society can benefit from?
Yeah, I think it's that same topic again of a lot of that research is not available in a structured form. So if I want to understand what's happening in research, I have to process a lot of textual information, which is going to be very time consuming, and it's going to very much slow down any kind of adoption of those results. I think that's also where research is still to be more open in that data sharing, so that the more data sharing happens, the more structured data is available that we could, for example, directly integrate into a knowledge graph, rather than having to extract stuff from text and trying to kind of reverse get that information out of it again. The more this could be accelerated, and the easier such a tech transfer could actually happen.
Do you think we need to do more to train the broader research community in understanding the value of knowledge graphs and how they can ensure that the data they put into the system is as easy to integrate as possible so they can make the most of that knowledge?
I think I've never talked to anyone not understanding the value of it. Mm-hmm. So it's this super obvious thing that, if we would be providing our data and we would provide it in a structured way, then everyone would be more efficient with it and it would be to the benefit of everyone. But it's that accessibility of technology.
Yeah.
If you are researching in the IT space, this is very natural. You're going to publish your data and you can publish your code, and that's just the most obvious thing. But that does not hold true for the majority of our research areas where just IT systems are not a core part of your life and where that is not so easy to achieve. And I think that's really where the change has to happen, where the barrier to that tooling, to be able to publish your data, to publish structural metadata around what you research, the results of your research outside of a research paper, where that has to become more of the norm and more accessible to anyone in a way that you don't need to major in IT additionally to do that.
I think sometimes researchers perhaps feel a little bit vulnerable when they put their information out there, perhaps if there's no way for them to get credit or acknowledgement for the work that they've done. But actually there's a lot more going on. I mean, Figshare is a great example of that. You can put your code and your data up there and you can mint a DOI. Do you think that initiatives like that will encourage people to share their data more?
Yeah, I think so. And it is not about necessarily sharing everything. There's, especially in corporate research, there's a ton of intellectual property you want to keep internal. And I can understand that, and that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, what you are publishing already in the form of your report, of your paper, or your poster, or whatever it is, you could have that in a structured form. You're not providing more information. You're just making that information much more accessible and findable, which means if you did valuable research, you're going to make sure that your research is much wider adopted, which is, I would hope, in the end, what is also the goal anyways. So it doesn't mean you have to go deeper into what you have. You don't necessarily have to reveal more data, while in many cases that would be beneficial as well. But that is not the absolute core thing. It's just, instead of having only unstructured data, having that already structured, so that is the basis for further building of research on top of it.
It really aligns with the so-called FAIR principles,
yes.
The findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible, which I think is the most important thing as well. It's brilliant. So, Sebastian, can you tell me what's exciting metafacts for the next year, 5 year, 10 years?
Well, for us, it's we have always provided technology only, and with technology, it always meant we had a lot of different things we were supporting, always built on the data, the information that whoever applied it had available. And now with that environment within digital science, with the Dimensions knowledge graph, we are going to a new era where we can now build a comprehensive information source that can help others build new things on top of it. And I think that is the really exciting thing for us that we have just started on. I mean, we launched it this week, and I'm super excited to learn about all of the things that our customers will be doing with that, all of the ways of how we can improve research, but also how we can help corporations in building new products based on top of that.
It really is a true democratization of data, as you said. So I'm going to ask you one final question. You have been part of this developmental team creating a really game-changing piece of technology that is really going to help support better research. What are your hopes for the future of research? What would you like to see from research in 5 years or 10 years?
Well, I would hope that research is picking up on that idea of structured information, not just structured metadata like the author and the citations, but really like there's this concept of nano publications also coming out of the knowledge graph space, where you take the specific statement that you are taking and you are providing that as a data set, and you are putting all of the evidence you have for that associated with it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be data. That can be just statements you're making about your research, but in a much more consumable, structured way to support, for example, running AI on top of it. And I think that is something I would love to see in the research community, because I think across any kind of research fields that would help us tremendously.
So claims, observations, it's an alternative data source to a paper, really, isn't it? Yes. The nano publication. We never know. Maybe we'll see that in Dimensions someday soon. Sebastian, it's been amazing chatting with you. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. I know you're really, really busy, but we've loved learning about knowledge graphs and about the Meta Factory. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.